Hello all, Kelly Jones again, talking about, again, Sherman Alexie's Part-Time Indian, and how Angela Nsinga's Taking Cartoons as Seriously as Books article really changed the way that I looked at cartoon drawings in a text. When I first started teaching, I did not do a whole lot of visual text analysis, but probably about 3 years ago, I attended a workshop at SCAD in Midtown Atlanta, and I was getting my AP certification, and I was first introduced to seriously looking at a visual text analysis as a way to help teaching. One of the little field trips they did, they took us down to the High Museum, which is just down the street, and we had to choose an exhibit there at the High and use that as a visual text analysis and come up with how we would use that in a lesson. I was not comfortable with that. I ended up deciding just to challenge myself and conquer my fear. I wanted to choose art that I really didn't connect with to use that as a visual text analysis. I didn't want to play it safe and choose the Dutch master still life of a skull and say, oh, this is Hamlet. So I looked at a really very contemporary modern art. It was like 7 or 8 huge pieces of just clear glass stacked in front of each other. And I realized that it made me kind of start thinking about art in a different way. I was teaching John Cheever's short story, The Swimmer, the story where the guy swims home through this network of swimming pools. And I thought about how those pieces of glass were like the pools in terms of the reflection, because the story was about how the protagonist ended up seeing himself. So I thought, well, you know, maybe I shouldn't be so scared of visual text analysis. But still in my mind, I thought, okay, I'll use that if it's something of the quality to be put in a museum. Cartoons, not so much. And then I don't know, I just didn't value cartoons as something to analyze as a visual text until several months ago when we had the Charlie Hebdo episode in France. That was the first time that I thought, you know, I could use a cartoon as a visual text to analyze in class, because the point of those cartoons was to make people think in a different way, to let them be challenged. And that was one thing that I kept thinking about as I was reading Dr. Nsinga's her piece on taking cartoons as seriously as books. My big takeaway from the piece was, instead of looking at cartoons like I first did when I flipped through here, I just looked at them as something to kind of keep, sort of like short attention span theater, something to keep a middle schooler or a high schooler from just kind of going to sleep. And I didn't really think about what they were doing. But the biggest takeaway that I got from Dr. Nsinga's piece, she challenged me to see that the cartoons do two things. They not only create their own narrative, but they enhance the narrative that's already there. Instead of just something that's just stuck there to kind of keep a student engaged, I began to realize that there was a function for those, and it was pretty interesting stuff as well. Biggest takeaway that I got was that, especially when we looked at the differences between the regular drawings that looked like Arnold would have just dashed them off very quickly, when we got to looking at the penciled portraits, and they were so different stylistically, that helped me stop for a minute and notice that their job was to add another level of emotional intimacy. That was one reason that I thought Rowdy defaced his own image. And it took me a minute. When I first looked at this and blew through it, I did not even notice that he ended up having his own face. And then Arnold is telling how in the text, Rowdy will come by and I hate for you to draw me. And he had taken and made just kind of a crude cartoon of his own face. It didn't connect with me the first time I looked at it, but I began to think, well, maybe Rowdy was not so comfortable with that level of emotional intimacy, and that was his response to that. But probably the coolest picture in there, I think, and one that Dr. Nsinga's article really helped me understand, is the very last picture where we don't even know who is who. Arnold gives so much attention to pointing out how different he is from everybody else on the reservation and everybody else at the high school. But here, we're not even sure which is which. He's sort of alike, and I think that's kind of a blessed relief for some teens. Another really interesting point in her article, I had not really thought about cartoons as being a type of text until she was pointing out the very first illustration where Arnold has just talked about how different he is. He's talking about how he was susceptible to seizures, and he's got all of the lines that are drawn around the edge of the page, and it's to indicate that he's shaking uncontrollably. And when she stated that those could be viewed as quotation marks because that is what's being said, that was something I had never really thought about. And it was a profound moment. And now that you're seeing so much popularity given to drawings, cartoon and otherwise, in young adult lit, it will be exciting for me to keep looking at more of it and seeing it in a different way. So I appreciate the secondary source challenging me to think differently, because that's what we're all about in the classroom. And I hope that I can continue to challenge my students to think, and I can continue to challenge myself to think differently as well.